Imagine a world where a single thread of silk is worth more than a human life. A world where the most powerful military commander in the empire has never seen a battlefield, but has seen the inside of an emperor's private chambers. This isn't a fairy tale of romance. It is a 1,500-year-old supply chain of human beauty. This is the history of the Chong, the male favorites of China, and the silent, brutal system that built them, bought them, and eventually buried them. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The air in the northern provinces of the Han Dynasty does not smell like the incense of a palace. It smells of dry earth, stagnant river water, and the quiet, desperate sweat of a family that has run out of time. In this world, survival is a calculation made in copper coins. You are 16 years old. You have spent your life watching the Yellow River, waiting for it to either feed your family or drown them. But today, the threat isn't the water. It is the man standing in your dirt floor kitchen. He is dressed in robes that cost more than your father's entire farm. He is a Yang, a human broker. He does not look at you like a person. He looks at you like a piece of jade that needs to be polished. The inspection is not quick. It is a slow, methodical invasion of your dignity. He starts with your hands. He isn't looking for strength. He is looking for the absence of it. He feels the length of your fingers, testing their flexibility. He is checking to see if these hands can be trained to pluck the strings of a guqin or hold a calligraphy brush without trembling. Then, he moves to your face. He lifts your chin with a cold, firm grip. He moves your head left and right, checking for symmetry, searching for a scar or a blemish that would lower your market value. The most disturbing part isn't the broker's touch, it's your father's silence. He stands 3 feet away, his eyes fixed on the floor. He isn't a monster. He is a man who has watched the crops fail 3 years in a row. He is a man who knows that if he doesn't sell one son today, the rest of the family will starve by winter. The broker opens your mouth. He inspects your teeth and your tongue, checking your health the same way a merchant checks a horse at a Saturday market. This is the administrative normal of ancient China. This isn't a crime in their eyes. It is a transaction. Finally, the broker speaks. He doesn't say your name. He says a number, a price. Your father nods. The sound of copper coins hitting a palm is the last thing you hear of your old life. In that moment, the you that belonged to a family, a village, and a history is deleted. You are no longer a son. You are a male favorite in training. As you are led away to a waiting carriage, the broker makes a note in a ledger. To him, you are an entry in a supply chain. To the empire, you are a companion. But as the dust of your village disappears behind you, the reality sets in. You are now property. And in the Chinese imperial system, property has a very short shelf life. The carriage stops. The dust of the rural provinces is replaced by the smell of expensive cedar and damp stone. You are no longer in the world of survival. You are in the world of aesthetics. But as the gates of the training compound creak shut behind you, you realize that this beauty is a different kind of cage. In the Han Dynasty, a male favorite was not born, he was manufactured. And the first step of manufacturing is to destroy the raw material. The transition is immediate and absolute. You are taken to a room where 3 older men wait. They do not speak to you as a person. They speak to you as a project. The first thing they take is your name. Every young man who entered these walls carried a name given by a mother, a name that meant third son or strong harvest. Those names are now forbidden. By sunset, you are given a new one, silver willow. It is an ornamental name, a name designed to sound delicate and decorative. It is the name of a product, not a human being. Then comes the physical transformation. Your rough, hemp clothes, the ones your mother wove for you, are stripped away. They are burned in a small courtyard fire. In their place, you are given robes of fine, undyed silk. To an outsider, this looks like a promotion. To you, it feels like a uniform. The silk is cold against your skin, a constant reminder that you are now a luxury good owned by a household. Training begins the next morning, and it does not stop for 2 years. This is the curriculum of silence. You are taught to speak in classical Chinese, a language of the elite that your parents could never understand. You spend 6 hours a day memorizing poetry, not because the masters care about your soul, but because a companion to an emperor must be able to quote the Book of Odes at a moment's notice. If you stumble over a stanza, your meal is withheld. If you weep for your home, you are made to stand in the cold until your tears dry. The goal of this training is standardized perfection. They are not looking for your personality, they are looking to erase it. You are taught the guqin, a 7-stringed zither. Your fingers, once calloused from the plow, must now move with the grace of a bird's wing. You are taught how to pour tea, the exact angle of the wrist, the precise moment to lower your eyes. Every movement is a performance. Underneath the calligraphy and the music, there is a darker lesson, rivalry. There are 30 other young men in this compound, all roughly your age, all with names like Jade or Morning Cloud. The masters ensure you never become friends. They reward the one who plays the best and punish the rest. They teach you that the person sleeping in the bunk next to you is not your brother, he is your replacement. By the end of the first year, the administrative normal has won. You have stopped looking at the gates. You have stopped trying to remember the layout of your village. The system has realized its ultimate goal. You have forgotten who you were, and you have become exactly what the empire wants to buy. You are a vessel, waiting to be filled by the whims of a powerful man. In the year 4 BC, the internal machinery of the Han dynasty produced a story that would haunt Chinese history for 2,000 years. It did not begin with a coup or a bloody battle. It began with a glance. The Emperor Ai was a man burdened by the cold, heavy expectations of the mandate of heaven. His life was a series of rituals, shadowed by the watchful eyes of stone-faced ministers and the rigid protocols of the Forbidden City. Then, during a routine court ceremony, his eyes fell upon a minor official's son named Deng. Deng was 22 years old, but in the records of the Book of Han, he is described as having a beauty that felt almost supernatural, a clear sky radiance that stopped the breath of the most powerful man in the world. The emperor did not just notice him, he became obsessed. Within days, Deng was moved from the outer circles of the bureaucracy into the inner sanctum of the palace. This was the moment the system of favorites shifted from a quiet tradition into a political wildfire. The speed of Dong's rise was a direct violation of every rule the Confucian scholars had spent centuries writing. First came the land. The emperor signed over vast estates that had belonged to the crown for generations. Then came the titles. Dong's father, a man of no previous significance, was suddenly elevated to the rank of marquis. His sister was brought into the imperial household to ensure the family's presence was inescapable. But it was the residential complex that truly made the court go pale. The emperor ordered the construction of a palace for Dong that was designed to rival the secondary imperial quarters. It was filled with rare woods, floors of polished jade, and silk hangings that shimmered like water. This was not a gift, it was a statement. The emperor was building a world where only two people existed. The veteran ministers watched this with a growing, icy dread. They knew that when an emperor's personal affection overrides the state's survival, the empire begins to rot from the inside. Prime Minister Wang Jia, a man who had served the throne with flawless loyalty, finally broke the silence. He composed a letter, a masterpiece of careful, respectful warning. He reminded the emperor that history is a mirror, and that every ruler who had elevated a favorite above the law had eventually watched their dynasty collapse. The emperor's response was not an argument, it was an execution of power. He did not debate the prime minister. He had him arrested on fabricated charges of disrespect. Wang Jia, one of the most brilliant minds in China, died in a cold prison cell because he tried to stand between a man and his obsession. With the opposition silenced, the emperor took the final, most dangerous step. He appointed Deng Xian as the supreme commander of the armed forces. Deng Xian was 22 years old. He had never held a sword in anger. He had never commanded a single squad of archers. He had never seen the dust of a battlefield or the blood of a campaign. Yet, he held the highest military position in the most powerful empire on earth. The generals and the soldiers, men who had spent 30 years earning their scars, were now forced to bow to a young man whose only qualification was the way he looked in the afternoon light. Their administrative normal had been pushed to its breaking point. Deng Xian was no longer just a companion, he was the head of the dragon. But as any scholar of the hand could have told him, the higher you are lifted by a single hand, the further you have to fall when that hand lets go. The story of the Han dynasty is often told through the lens of tax records, border disputes, and military maps. But the most enduring image of this era, the one that defined Chinese literature for the next 2 millennia, took place in the absolute silence of a private bedroom. It was an afternoon of such profound tenderness that it created a linguistic scar on the Chinese language. Emperor Ari and Deng Xian were resting after the midday meal. Outside the heavy silk curtains of the imperial chambers, the machinery of the empire continued to grind. Ministers waited with scrolls. Messengers waited with reports of unrest. But inside, the world had narrowed to a single bed and a single moment of quiet. Deng Xian had fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. His head had come to rest on the wide, embroidered sleeve of the emperor's ceremonial robe. The emperor needed to rise. The afternoon session of the court was beginning, and the Son of Heaven could not be late without causing a scandal that would ripple through every province. A normal man would have gently pulled his arm away. An emperor had every right to wake a servant, even a favorite. But Emperor Ari looked down at the sleeping face of the man he had elevated above the law, and he could not bring himself to disturb that peace. Instead of waking him, the emperor reached for a small, sharp blade. With a steady hand and a silent breath, he cut through the priceless silk of his own imperial sleeve, leaving the fabric beneath Deng Xian's head. He rose quietly, leaving a piece of himself behind so that a sleeping man would not have to open his eyes a moment too soon. By evening, the story had leaked. It bypassed the official court historians and flooded the hallways of the palace. It was a story of such extreme devotion that the officials, the very men who hated Deng Xian's influence, began to cut their own sleeves in a desperate, performative act of loyalty. They wanted to signal that they understood the emperor's heart. From that single afternoon, the phrase Duan Xiu Pai, the passion of the cut sleeve, was born. It became the standard Chinese expression for love between men, used by poets and scholars for over 2,000 years. But underneath the poetry and the cut silk, the shadow of the blade remained. This was the fragile luxury that your audience recognizes. The emperor's love was a shield, but a shield is only as strong as the person holding it. In the imperial system, a favorite's power is not his own, it is borrowed light. Every estate Deng Xian owned, every soldier who saluted his rank, and every silk robe he wore was tied to a single heartbeat. The emperor was young, but in the ancient world, youth was no guarantee of time. The court officials weren't just cutting their sleeves, they were sharpening their knives. They were waiting for the one thing that no emperor could stop, the end of a reign. Deng Xian lived in a palace of glass, and the air was getting colder. The tradition of the male favorite did not die with the Han dynasty. It became a permanent, quiet shadow that followed every emperor for the next 1,500 years. But it reached its most chaotic and surreal peak during the Ming dynasty, under a ruler who decided that the Forbidden City was not a palace, but a prison. Emperor Zhengde inherited the throne in 1505 at the age of 14. He was a teenager with the keys to the most powerful civilization on earth, and he was bored. He did not want to sit on a throne of gold and listen to old men discuss tax grain and border fortifications. He wanted a world that he could control entirely, a world built for pleasure, strength, and companionship. He walked out of the Forbidden City and built the Leopard Quarter. This was a massive private complex constructed directly next to the Imperial Zoo. It contained over 200 rooms, and it was filled with the most eclectic collection of human beings ever assembled in China. There were wrestlers, Buddhist monks, acrobats, musicians, and, most importantly, a revolving door of young male favorites gathered from every corner of the empire. The Leopard Quarter was not a retreat, it was an alternative government. Zhengde lived there for 13 years, refusing to return to the formal palace. If a minister needed a signature on a document of national importance, he had to navigate past cages of actual leopards and tigers to find the emperor. The administrative normal had become a circus. When officials protested that the emperor was neglecting his sacred duties, Zhengde had them beaten. Records suggest that over a dozen high-ranking officials died from these punishments. Zhengde's favorites held a power that was absolute and terrifying. One associate was found to have accumulated 70 chests of gold and over 2,000 chests of silver. In a world where a peasant lived on a few copper coins a year, this was not just wealth, it was a mountain of stolen sunlight. But just like Deng Xian and Deng Tong before them, these men were living on borrowed time. In 1521, Zhengde fell from a boat during a pleasure excursion and died shortly after. He was only 29. The moment his heart stopped, the Leopard Quarter was dismantled with a clinical, vengeful fury. The favorites were hunted down, their wealth was seized, and their names were scrubbed from the official records. The system that had allowed them to rise was the same system that ensured they would leave no trace behind. This is the final, most haunting truth of the Nan Chong. We know the names of the emperors because they are carved in stone. We know the names of the famous favorites like Deng Xian because their stories changed the language. But what about the thousands of others? What about the 16-year-old boy from the first chapter, whose father sold him for a handful of coins? What about the thousands of young men who spent their youth in locked rooms, learning to play the guqin and porti, only to be thrown onto the streets the moment they turned 25? The system was so efficient that it didn't just consume their lives, it consumed their memory. They were stripped of their family names upon entry. They were given ornamental names like silver willow or jade that treated them as objects. And when they died, they were buried in unmarked graves, far from the villages they were stolen from. 1,500 years of documented history, and yet the vast majority of these men have been reduced to a collective silence. The passion of the cut sleeve is remembered as a story of tenderness, but for the men who lived it, it was a story of a blade that cut the sleeve, a blade that cut the family tie, and a blade that eventually cut the thread of their existence. This is the history that was never meant to be spoken of again, the history of the people who were bought to be loved and lived to be forgotten. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.